Welcome back to the Brew Bot development log. Our first 3 episodes took us through work that I had recorded in one session a couple months ago, but now we're all caught up to the present, and I've received lots of great feedback that I can now put to the test. The biggest of which is the suggestion to use the Godot Engine instead of Unreal, and that's where we pick things up today. So it's been, how long has it been? Like a month since I worked on this, so it's gonna take a minute to get back into it and figure out what I want to do next. So, changing engines. Definitely considering it, and now would be the easiest time, well, before I did anything would have been the easiest time to do it, but it's not going to get any easier changing engines. Okay, let's just look around in here. I've looked around a little bit, and I did like it more, because in Unreal I'm kind of working from the ceiling down, because it gives you so much to work with, more than I need for sure. Whereas in this, it starts from the bottom and you build from the ground up. This is really a lot more empty and simple. Let's see if I can't remember how this works. So 3D scene, okay. So this is a lot like Unity, and I have used Unity before, although it's been like 5 years since I've used it. So to make a cube, how did I do that? That's right, I can't make a cube. It's easy in Unreal Engine, and it's just there in Blender. Hopefully making a cube is one of the harder things to do in this engine. Otherwise, we're in for quite an uphill battle. Mesh instance 3D. Let's just do, to keep things simple, let's just put everything on top of a big cube. Collision physics. Let's do rigid body 3D. Because it should, no, static body 3D, because it's gonna sit still. It's gonna be a little bit weird trying to find this stuff right now, but it should kind of get easy. So now we can make a rigid body 3D, which is, you can read the little descriptions they have down here, which is very nice. It's like a physics object. So for this, we're gonna want another, it's gonna be basically the same thing as this. In fact, I think I can just copy and then paste. Yeah, look at that. And I just have a cube on a rigid body now. So we need a camera now. Camera 3D. So now, if I go to the game tab, it might take a second. When I did this before, it took a second for the first time. And look at that. This is what I like. There's no lighting. There is no background. There's no environment lighting. There are no point lights. There are no materials. There's nothing. It's just, all I did was make a cube, make another cube, and place a camera, and the renderer is not doing anything crazy. It's just rendering what I put in front of it. World environment. And then you can make a new one, and then you can open it, open the background, clear color sky. This will actually just be completely black, right? If I click play, shouldn't be able to see anything. Yeah. Directional light is like a sun. Omnidirectional light is a point light. And spotlight is, yeah, it's a spotlight. So let's do omnidirectional. That's the kind of thing I'm looking for. If I do this, is that more accurate to, this is more accurate to our scene. Now, when I click play, yeah. This is what I had in mind when I imagined making a game. Simple, procedural steps towards something, with minimal fussing around with weird stuff that gets in the way. This lacks almost everything I dislike about Unreal Engine. It's just got a really good, pure feel to it. The only thing I'm worried about is not being able to adapt to the scripting after having gotten comfortable with Unreal Engine's blueprints. I definitely want to use this though, try it out. It just looks nicer, it feels nicer, the idea of it is more appealing, it's more in line with the game I want to make. I mean, there's not many reasons, and look at this. I don't know if this is real. What? Are these all free? It just says download. Wii input. Like, are there actually like dozens of pages of free add-ons that people just made out of the goodness of their hearts? That's like really hard to believe for some reason. The scary thing about this is that there's no, about scripting like this is, the thing is it feels like there's no structure to it or guidance, but it seems like Godot has a really good online documentation. In fact, I believe you can open it in-app, right? Yeah, they have their documentation in the software with examples that you can copy. Like, this seems like just better Unity, right? And I actually did like Unity. It was pretty fun to use. It felt pretty good to use. It was the scripting part that didn't feel so good, because it just felt very much like you're kind of on your own. I didn't feel like I knew what I was doing almost ever, but their language in here, what's it called? It's GD script. It looks a little bit like Java with this variable thing. I think that's a JavaScript thing. It looks very, very readable and clean. It could just be those examples being super simple. Everything about this looks like it would be fun to learn and use, but that's just a theory. I'd have to actually try to use it. If we're going with this engine, the next thing to really push the project forward is just to bring some of this level into Godot and, see what textures look like, see what its renderer does with this scene. I think it'll do better things than Unreal did. Unreal, it's got a realistic look to it, and I don't think that worked very well. It didn't look great. I think it'll look a lot cooler in here with some simpler lighting, simpler rendering. So that's the goal today, to get some of this model imported into Godot. But I don't want to use that as a distraction to avoid doing any scripting, because the scripting is my biggest concern for me when it comes to using this engine. So let's try and get comfortable. And okay, so how am I going to learn the scripting? Controlling an object with an input would be a good start. We do mesh, we do collision shape, and then we do mesh instance. And then also I can give the player some color, I think. New standard material 3D. Albedo. So I think I can attach script. Is that how I do this? Template. Basic movement. Oh, let's do that. Let's start with a template. That'll help a lot. So these are two variables. We have speed and we have jump velocity. Extends character body 3D, which is this. So that's how you know it's attached. And you have like tabs. Since I'm working from a template here, I'm going to be analyzing and sort of deconstructing it. There will be some specific things that I don't understand, but if I can at least get the gist of most of these lines, I'll be happy. So if I play this now... Oh, he can jump. Is it the arrow keys? It's the arrow keys. Okay. So he doesn't interact with this physics object. Now that it moves, I'm going to follow the advice of a note in the preset, which tells me to replace the default inputs with my own custom ones. I found my way over to the input map menu and was able to create an input. I didn't really understand this menu at first, so I looked at the existing inputs and kind of figured it out. Now I had WASD bound as up, left, down, right. So I've basically done what they suggested here and made my own actions, my own inputs on WASD. Yeah, and it worked, except for W. W's not working. I think I did that one wrong. Oh, I also spelled it all caps. Yes. Cool. Alright, now the cube moves and does so with the right input, but I want it to interact with the physics, so I found a good tutorial on YouTube. And in this tutorial, the character is made of a rigid body instead of a character node. That way it intrinsically interacts with other rigid bodies. So I did the same and copied the scripting while making some slight changes where necessary. Okay, this is an old video, so it might be outdated. Action. So this is gonna work a little bit differently because it just adds force. Add force not found. Do you mean apply force? So would it be apply central force? Yeah, so they changed the name of some things. So it's the same thing basically, because this part is just to get the center. Okay, so let's say I want to change the name of this. Okay, Control R does find and replace. We do this, or Replace with move speed. Replace all. Okay. Cool. And then I'm probably going to want a separate variable for jump height. I'll set it to 10 as well. What is spacebar called? Enter or space. Yeah, because you have to think about, on a controller, it would be like X or A, which would be accept on menus. So then we're going to do if input apply impulse. And then what is it not happy about? Vecto 3 or VCOT. Vector 3, I believe it should be called. So I don't know if this will work. Let's see. Let's go play. Ooh, there's some friction going on there, some inertia, and I think that move speed is not high enough. Okay, what about jump? It doesn't have a cooldown. Or 10 is crazy. One or the other. But, look at that. Yeah, it's hitting it. This is stuff where you'd add constraints and whatnot, probably. Not necessarily how you would actually have your character work in the game that I'm trying to make. But that's very cool. Okay, progress. So far, making things in here with GD script is actually a ton of fun. It's not as confusing as I was worried it would be. Or at least not yet. And it's really satisfying to find solutions and build things. And so far, I've built something that is in dire need of some solutions. So I found that it wasn't the jump height number causing the moon jump, but the fact that it adds an impulse of force every single tick that the spacebar is held down. My first idea was to create a cooldown on applying the force, so that it would only happen like once every second or so. But that's not a good idea at all, since it would let you jump while in the air as long as you hadn't pressed jump recently. So instead, I need to make the jump only work if you're on the ground, which means I need a way to check for that. But unfortunately, while that is super easy on a character node, it's not built into a rigid body node that we're using here. The best way of doing this seemed to be with ray casting, which is just a laser that you can cast to read whatever object it hits, or get information like the distance between the start and end of that ray, which is what we'll be doing with it. I looked around at the documentation to try and figure this out, and came across a YouTube video which shows how to set up and use a raycast. So I made a raycast 3D node, nested it as a child of the rigid body 3D, and placed it aiming down at the ground beneath the character. And it turns out you can make a new script on this raycast node and have it communicate its information over to the main rigid body 3D script. The first thing I did was make sure the raycast is working properly by printing out the target position. I was kinda just guessing on some of this stuff, and going back and forth with the documentation to try and figure out exactly how to type these things. And lo and behold, we get a weird vector number popping up, which doesn't seem to change when I jump, which I'm guessing is because target position is actually just the endpoint of the raycast. I found a great forum post which shows how to get the distance between the start of the cast and whatever it ends up hitting, like a tape measure from the bottom of our character to see how far away the ground is. So I typed those few simple lines of code. The origin variable is the start point. The collision point variable is where the cast hits. The variable that we really want out of all of this. So before we do anything with this distance number, I want to print it out to be sure it works as expected. And as you can see in the console, it works perfectly. It seems like the number sits down below 0.1 when you're on the ground, so that's what we'll consider grounded. Now comes the tricky part, delivering this data over to the rigid body 3D script from the raycast 3D script. I'm going to start by making an if statement that checks if the distance number is below 0.1 and then sets a boolean variable to true if it is. Now is where I'm going to need to figure out how I'm going to read that true or false from here in the player script. I did find a way to do this in a forum post, but when I tried printing the boolean, the game crashed. So I tried some new things and changed some things, and it launched. But the console is just printing null, which was actually because I had set up the touching ground boolean wrong. So I was declaring a new one instead of assigning the value to the original one at the top of the page. And now it works, but it's completely broken, which is progress. So the issue here was that I was only checking for distance while the ray was colliding, so I moved the distance variable up out of that function and moved the if statement out of the collision one. Now honestly, in hindsight, I think the raycast was actually starting under the floor, which means this solution isn't really the right one. But hey, whatever, it worked. Which means now we just need to put the jump button in an if statement which checks if the grounded boolean is true. And error. Luckily, some of my limited coding knowledge kicked in and reminded me that a single equals symbol assigns a variable, while you use a double equals symbol to check. So I was basically trying to set the boolean true in this if statement instead of reading it. Now, when we press play, jumping doesn't work at all. I tried cranking up the jump height just to check, but that didn't do anything. Well, it turns out I was setting the main script's version of the boolean only once when the game began, which meant it was permanently false since the player starts off in the air. So I changed it to happen every tick, and... What? Well, it turns out 10 is actually crazy for jump height, because it's right about where it should be down here at 1 jump height. The fact that all of that actually resulted in something that worked, and something that I understand on basically every level, is very exciting. But after all of that number stuff that make head hurt, I messed around with some lights and colors, and stupid fun dumb stuff like that.
So, I just want to go ahead and make a new project, maybe?
Yep, all of that down the toilet. But I have way more confidence in using Godot and GD script now. So let's get our scene imported and see how it looks. I cut a lasagna slice out of the level by using a cube with the boolean modifier on it, which should be called the lasagna slice modifier. Now we've got a nice little diorama that will give us a good idea of how this looks and works without being too cumbersome. So I exported the model as an FBX, imported it by dragging it in, and then dragged the model out into the level, which has no textures for some reason. Well, apparently Godot wants some other weird format for 3D models, not FBX. So I re-exported as GLTF and gave it another go, and this time I can see that it brought in the textures. And they're all applied and have their normal maps set up and everything. Now I can make a skybox and put our skybox image onto it. Again, this is not the final skybox or anything, just a placeholder. And I found an FOV slider which adds a cool parallaxing effect. Now I can set up a directional light, which is basically like a sun in Blender. I made it a little greener and tried launching the game to see how it looks. Yep, like the viewport. Then I used some Omni lights and some spotlights to set up some of the lighting that we had in Blender, which I think worked really well. Now I might as well import Brew Bot and see how he looks.
Super. Whoa, no, he's not tiny. He was. Get that. See, this rendering style is much closer to what I was imagining. Let's make a new script on this guy. Let's make this pretty simple. What I should actually do is add a new character, I think it's called, character body 3D. Can attach a script. Yep, basic movement template. So I'm assuming, can you attach several scripts to one object? If input is pressed, UI accept, which is spacebar or enter, and is on floor, which that's all you have to do in this character body script, instead of that physics version I had where I had to basically create this. Okay, so it's not adding velocity though, it's setting, and I could see there being issues with that. That's another issue with this, is there will be no diagonal movement because it's a variable that'll only ever be left, right, up, or down. No, wait. I'm wrong. Because it's making a vector out of all 4 inputs, so that they will like multiply against each other. What do you mean if direction? I think when you do if on a variable like that, it just asks if it has non-zero data or whatever. I guess that way, because this is in physics process, which goes off every tick. So I think this is just to make sure that it's not calculating things, doing things when it doesn't need to. So if velocity x equals direction x times speed, which speed is this. So this is the actual movement. All of this stuff is set up for this. Else, so if there's no direction, oh, actually that's why they're asking if there's any input. If direction basically means if input in this case. And then else, this is move toward 0. So this is like inertia, or not inertia, but so you stop moving. I guess you could call it friction or something like that. So this is when you're done inputting, you'll slowly stop moving. So move toward has me a little bit confused. You give it a set of numbers. Okay, wait, moves from to, so from is the first float, which in this case is your current what you're at right now, to 0 by the factor of speed. Oh wow, so you stop at the same speed that you speed up. So if you wanted to change that, you could make speed here a different variable. So like if the ground feels too slidey, I mean, I could start making different physics materials and have the script interact with them if that's necessary, unless you can just have unless I could just give my character a physics material that does that stuff for me. At the bottom, it just says move and slide. So that's confusing. If the other body is a character body 3D or rigid body 3D, it will also be affected by the motion of the other body. I think if I would have just read this and kind of played into this, I wouldn't have had to make that more physicsy version of the character that like adds force and stuff, because I think this basically incorporates system, right? Because this is still in the physics process. This is basically incorporating like a pseudo physics with objects that aren't hooked into the main physics system, I believe. So let's just try this here. Requested file format unknown GLB. Because I opened the GLB for inspection, a non-inherited scene, and then left it open. I probably did the same thing. Don't save. Restart. Look at that. That's funny, because there's no collider element to the ground. So this is where things get into some territory I haven't done yet. So let's add a child node to this. I think collision polygon 3D is what I need to do. So am I supposed to do... Oh wait, whoa, what am I thinking? Static body 3D. I don't think I'm understanding this correctly. On imported model. Generate physics on. Oh, yeah. Do I need static body 3D even? Or can I just have level cube? Yes. Oh wait, and I can probably control my character. Yeah, he's a bit backwards in every regard. Oh. Okay. I mean, yeah, so far, I like this way more than Unreal Engine. The scripting's a little bit scary, but it's so, like, I hate Visual Studio sometimes, and this is really clean and approachable feeling compared to that. I don't know, man. So far, I'm enjoying this. Oh, I wonder if I could use WASD then to turn the character. Wouldn't that be cool? So I have something in mind that I'm having trouble getting out. There's this input direction vector of like up, down, left, right, but I want to make a different thing where I can just have left and right. I wonder what this would do. So let's undo my weird stuff I'm trying to figure out here. So what would this do in practice? We lost him. Yeah. So it looks like he's spinning extremely quickly because it's he's moving in a direction, therefore he turns, therefore the direction he's moving in changes, therefore he turns. Because he's trying to move to his right, but then he tries to look to his right. And so he's just spinning. You know what? This is probably a good time to wrap things up before we make it any worse. But before we're done, I've spent a lot of time working on the concept of this game, which I should share before we get things going next week. So last time we talked, Brew Bot was a 3D platformer with visuals inspired by Super Mario 64, and that was pretty much it. I mentioned a decoratable cafe and some kind of coffee bean system, but that's really as far as I got with the idea. But I got to thinking about the combat and how it should work. I thought about the games I play that have really enjoyable combat, and what it is about them that's enjoyable. I started coming up with some fun ideas, but then realized I had kinda left the platforming behind. So I went to think of platformers that have platforming that I really enjoy, and I realized something. I don't play platformers. I don't know what I was thinking. I have all kinds of fun sounding ideas that I just can't wait to build and try for combat gameplay, but not one thing that comes to mind for platforming. And that's not to say I'm making Brew Souls now,
But the slider has shifted. What was once a 3D platformer that might have combat elements has now become an action-adventure platformer. So here's the gist of the combat. You have 4 abilities which consume coffee beans. These abilities are activated by holding the right trigger and pressing triangle, square, X, or circle in the case of a PlayStation controller. Square is a 360 sweep, which is good for getting enemies away, and just costs 1 coffee bean. Triangle is a jab punch, which costs 3 beans, and has a good amount of directional range and deals a lot of damage. Then there's Circle, which begins grinding 1 bean per second and restoring HP. And lastly is Coffee Blast on the X button, which is a big explosion that consumes 10 coffee beans, but deals a large radius of high damage and knockback. But how do you get these coffee beans? Well, that's where your basic punch ability comes in, which is bound to the square button. This doesn't do very much damage, doesn't have great range, and doesn't stun enemies very much, so it's the least safe and least effective way of attacking. But punching an enemy is free, and causes them to drop a couple coffee beans, which lets you use your abilities. So that's the flow of most combat situations, carefully punching coffee beans out of enemies, and then picking and choosing the abilities to use. Managing your coffee beans to make sure you have enough to heal if you need to, or use an emergency crank sweep. But I want to have smaller enemies that group up, as well as larger, slower ones that feel more like a one-on-one, which is where the L1 button comes in. Remember when I said this isn't Brew Souls? Well, I was lying, because L1 is to parry. Pressing L1 as an attack hits you will deflect the attack and stun the enemy. While stunned, they'll take a ton of bonus damage from abilities, or you can hit them with a basic punch instead and it'll knock a whole bunch of coffee beans out of them. These are the combat abilities. Let's talk about the platforming moves. Of course, pressing X jumps, and holding the left trigger crouches. So obviously, pressing jump while holding the left trigger means you do a high jump, which has less directional control. But if you want to have some extra directional control in the air, you could hold R1 to helicopter the crank handle, which makes you slow fall. So why not just always slow fall? Well, because if you land harder on the ground, the kinetic energy of the fall is absorbed by Brew Bot's legs and redirected forward, giving you a slight speed boost. So while it is safer to slow fall, it's faster to hit the ground harder. Another movement option is the dive, which is bound to circle. You can press this while moving to dive in that direction, or while stationary to dive in whichever direction your character is pointed in. And you can dive in the air as well to get some extra distance, or to change directions. After diving, you'll enter a belly slide, which can be cancelled by jumping. I came up with these things. These are not stolen from a different game. These are my ideas. And while landing on your feet will not cause fall damage because of Brew Bot's springy legs, landing any other way will. So if you dive off of a ledge, or are hit and stunned off of a ledge, you will take fall damage. Then there's one final movement option, which is pressing R1 while on the ground, which will cause Brew Bot to break into a sprint. Now I know what you're thinking. This sounds terrible. There should not be a sprint button in a 3D platformer. But actually, there should be. Let me explain. While you're sprinting, you can't jump. This is just for flat ground traversal, for the oh crap, whoops, I'm supposed to be over there kind of moments. But it's not just for that. It has combat applications too, because while you can't attack while sprinting either, there is one thing you can do, and that's heal. Healing is a similarly restrictive action, not allowing attacks or much of anything. So sprinting while healing just naturally makes sense as a combo, zipping between enemies while letting your health recover. And actually, pretty much all of the platforming moves do have their own combat applications. Diving can be used to dodge an attack or close and create distance between an enemy, but it will not grant invulnerability. It's just a fast way to move your character. Jumping on an enemy's head will deal a small amount of damage, and is a good way to get past them. Landing after a jump dive will create a very small knockback wake, which makes it a good safe escape option. Heck, even crouching could serve the subtle and probably never useful option of slightly shrinking your hitbox. So at this point in this project, I'm thinking of a game closer to medieval than Super Mario 64. I still want platforming and mobility that you use to interact with the level and all of that, but I want the combat to sit at least 50-50 or even center stage to the platforming. And there are all kinds of peripheral ideas I have for really cool systems and mechanics to make this core gameplay that much more engaging, enjoyable, and replayable. Like for example, mods that you can equip into a few slots, which give you some kind of extra combat benefit. Maybe it would be enemies drop an additional coffee bean when punched. Coffee Blast leaves a puddle of hot coffee on the ground for a while. Parried enemies stay stunned for longer. Different effects that you could mix and match to create interesting playstyles. But this is really just a hopefully kind of thing. I understand that I'm piling my plate pretty high as it is, so these peripheral features will have to remain options to consider when this game is more complete. And unfortunately, that includes the cafe decorating. I will definitely have a cafe that you launch into levels from, but customizing it will have to be something I keep as more of a consideration than a promise. So that's Brew Bot. For now at least. Some details will probably change, but this is something that I can get myself much more excited for. I really feel like making all of these things happen, and that's all gonna start next episode. Everything we've done up to now has been more or less preparatory, kind of shaking things down and getting a more solid idea, which I think we have now. So I think next episode will be about trying to figure out some character movement, and not the kind of movement we ended up with today. Well, anyways, that's gonna do it for this episode. I'll talk to you next time. Thanks.